Episode 5, Two Encounters. Blood stained his hands as he moved nimbly away from the tent. In the background loomed as a dark mass the youngster's tent, now sliced open, blood-stained. He had completed the task efficiently, coolly calm. 3 young people had stopped breathing. The blond man's eyes surveyed carefully in the darkness. Although the sun would rise soon, deep darkness still prevailed in the forest. He cleaned the knife carefully on the hem of his clothing and pushed it into the sheath on his belt. The man's backpack now contained 3 young people's belongings: wallets, watches, motorcycle keys. Evidence that had to be taken along. He knew no one must find the murderer, not yet, not for decades. Stepping deeper into the forest, the murderer suddenly heard a rustling. Someone was approaching the tent site from the opposite direction. The stranger's steps were heavy, determined, too heavy to be young Nils, whom the murderer hadn't found. The murderer quickly pressed against a tree trunk, blending into the darkness, hand ready to grab the knife. He waited to see the newcomer better. In the light's glow appeared a man. Large, like a bear, moving slowly through the trees toward the path leading to the tent. The murderer recognized the figure, Gillstrom, the kiosk owner from the lake shore. The man walked hunched, carrying some kind of object in his hands, a metal pipe or baseball bat. His gaze was fixed firmly on the murdered group's tent. The murderer immediately understood, the kiosk owner had come to arrange his own revenge, to chase away the youngsters who should have left at his command. Dark coincidence had brought 2 killers to the same place. Gillstrom was only 10 meters from the murderer, still unaware of the foreign presence. The murderer considered his options. He could let the man continue, find the tent and bodies. It might be useful, suspicions would easily fall on the kiosk owner, who was known to hate campers. But what if Gillstrom noticed him? What if someone saw them both? The risk was too great. The murderer decided to act. He stepped slowly from behind the tree, mapping the quickest route away, but a branch cracked under his foot. Gillstrom stopped as if hitting a wall and turned toward the sound. "Who's there?" he shouted, voice tense. The murderer didn't answer. He moved quickly from tree to tree, trying to circle the kiosk owner. "I know someone's there." Gillstrom shouted again, now waving the metal object threateningly. "Show yourself, or I'll come get you." The murderer knew he couldn't wait. He rushed forward, intending to run past the kiosk owner before he could react. But Gillstrom was surprisingly fast despite his size. He turned and took a side step right into the murderer's path. The men collided inevitably. The murderer tried to dodge at the last moment, but it was too late. Their bodies crashed together with full force. Gillstrom's metal rod flew in an arc into the darkness. Both fell to the ground, the murderer underneath, the kiosk owner partially on top of him. "Fucking hell!" Gillstrom cursed, trying to get up. "Who the hell are you?" The murderer didn't answer but struggled to free himself. His hand was pinned between their bodies, and he couldn't reach the knife. Gillstrom pressed him to the ground, trying to identify the attacker. The murderer felt the kiosk owner's breath on his face, smelled alcohol and tobacco. "Who the hell are you?" Gillstrom asked suspiciously. "What are you doing here?" Gillstrom's sentence was cut short. Just then a powerful, bright light reflected from the lake, illuminating the entire forest in a flash. It was like an enormous searchlight had ignited in the middle of the water, creating an unnaturally bright glow. Both men turned to look. The beam of light was now directed upward, toward the sky, creating a massive, vertical pillar into the dark night. Gillstrom's grip loosened on the murderer. His face was horrified. And then fear struck him with full force. His legs began to move, first stumbling, then accelerating to a run. He fled into the forest, farther from the tent site, farther from the lake, farther from the light. The murderer used the moment, rolled up and started running in the opposite direction toward the denser forest, away from the lake, away from the light. The light consumed Nils. His consciousness wavered between darkness and blinding brightness. He had risen into the air, been pulled toward the source of the light beam, and then everything had gone dark. Now everything was white. Nils felt himself floating weightlessly, his body drifting as if in warm water. But he couldn't move. His limbs wouldn't obey. He was completely paralyzed, unable even to turn his head. Gradually the light began to dim. Nils saw he was in a vast, round room. The ceiling was high, curved like a planetarium dome, but full of flickering, pulsing lights that turned on and off. They didn't resemble any earthly technology. Beneath him was a flat, metallic surface, like an operating table. His wrists and ankles were secured with invisible restraints. He saw no ropes or shackles, but still felt strong pressure against his limbs. "Help!" Nils tried to shout, but his voice was barely a whisper. His throat felt dry and tight. Then he saw them. They appeared as if from nowhere from the edges of the room. Small, gray figures, at most a meter tall. Their heads were disproportionately large, almost half the size of their entire body. Huge, almond-shaped eyes dominated narrow faces that had only lines for mouths and nostrils. Nils felt freezing horror take over his mind. These weren't humans. They weren't anything he'd ever seen or believed existed. The beings approached slowly, almost floating above the floor. They gathered around Nils, observing him with cold, black eyes. There were now 4 of them, all identical, all completely motionless. "What are you?" Nils asked weakly. "What do you want from me?" The beings didn't react to his words. They just stood and stared, as if studying him from a distance. Then one of them, slightly smaller than the others, raised a narrow hand. In its fingers was some thin, metallic device, like a syringe but longer and thinner. It approached Nils and pressed the device against his forehead. The pain was immediate and crushing. Nils would have screamed if he could, but only a weak whimper came from his throat. It felt like his brain was being drilled through, like a hot needle was pushing through skin and bone straight into his nervous system. At the same time he felt something else. Thoughts that weren't his own. Images flowing through his mind. He saw hundreds, thousands of different worlds, beings, landscapes. Saw the vastness of space in all its incomprehensibility. Saw a fireball-like flying craft, very similar to the one he was now in, descending over the lake, sinking into the water. The being pulled the device away. The pain disappeared immediately but left behind a strange humming in Nils's head. His ears rang, as if some frequency had been tuned into his brain. Then another being stepped forward. This one had in its hand a flat, translucent plate, like a thin piece of glass, but flexible and glowing. The being pressed the device onto Nils's chest. It felt cold, metallic, but melted almost immediately into his skin, becoming invisible. Nils felt how the device penetrated under his skin, spread like mercury through his bloodstream. It was like 1,000 sharp needle drops simultaneously, penetrating organs, bones, tissues. "Stop," he now shouted louder, and to his surprise found his voice worked again. "What are you doing to me?" The beings paused their activity for a moment, as if listening. They looked at each other, communicated in a way Nils couldn't comprehend. Then they continued, completely indifferent to his suffering. A third being brought something that resembled a dark, liquid ball. It floated in the air, spinning as if defying gravity. The being placed it under Nils's chin, and the liquid began to flow upward, through his mouth, nose, eyes. Nils choked. He felt the cold liquid penetrating his lungs, filling his airways. But he didn't die. Somehow he still breathed, even though his lungs were full of foreign matter. "Why?" he asked, strangely able to speak in the liquid. "Why me?" Instead of an answer, he saw more images, as if projected directly into his mind. Images of people being studied like he was now. Images of experiments that had been done for centuries. And then images of a place he recognized immediately, Lake Bodom. The lake had special significance for these beings. It was some kind of portal or beacon, something that drew them to it. There was something there that they sought, watched, studied. Nils saw with episodic precision patterns that resembled his horrible situation seen earlier. A man committing bloodshed at the tent, but somehow distant, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. "You caused it," Nils suddenly realized, struggling against the liquid. You made him a murderer. The beings didn't react. They continued their work, connecting devices to his body, taking samples, measuring, never stopping, never showing the slightest compassion. Now a fourth being approached. This one had in its hand a small, clear crystal. It was like a diamond, but glowing, as if a flame burned inside it. The being placed the crystal directly on Nils's forehead. The pain was unbearable. Nils's eyes went dark, and he felt his consciousness fleeing. The last thing he saw before darkness was the beings' faces, still expressionless, still studying. Then the crystal burned its way into his mind, and everything went out.